In about 2 weeks, if nothing goes wrong again, the Artemis 2 mission will be launched. NASA is preparing for its first crewed mission beyond low Earth orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972. This mission will also be the first time astronauts fly aboard the Orion spacecraft. On paper, this should be a historic moment, but behind the celebrations, there is a problem that NASA has not yet fully explained in its public presentations. During the Artemis 1 mission in 2022, the Orion capsule or spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere and safely landed in the water. Publicly, the mission was declared a success. After the capsule was recovered, the engineers noticed something unexpected. The heat shield was not worn down smoothly and uniformly. Instead, it was full of marks and deep holes, where literally pieces of the charred material had completely detached. Incredibly, 1.5 years after the Artemis 1 mission, an inspector general who is part of an independent body overseeing NASA published a complete document on the failures of the Orion shield. Quote, NASA identified more than 100 locations where the protective material of the spacecraft's heat shield unexpectedly detached during re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Although the shield successfully protected the crew module and its systems, after the inspection and recovery of the spacecraft, engineers noticed unexpected variations in the appearance of the avcoat. The unexpected behavior of the avcoat creates the risk that the heat shield may not sufficiently protect the capsule systems and crew from the extreme heat of re-entry in future missions. Furthermore, although there was no evidence of impact with the crew module, the quantity and size of the debris could have caused sufficient structural damage to lead to the failure of one of the Orion spacecraft's parachutes. The investigation concluded that the shield material was not sufficiently permeable. This caused internal gas pressure buildups that could not escape. Well, my friends, basically, the avcoat coating of the heat shield was excessively dense, causing the material to not, quote, breathe properly. Do as much composibus imagine musimagemos. When Orion plunged into the atmosphere at speeds exceeding Mach theta, the temperatures on the surface rose to about 2,700 degrees Celsius. This heat not only burned the external material but also generated gases within the thermal shield itself. But in the case of Orion, they could not escape properly. The pressure began to build up beneath the surface, forcing the material until cracks formed and pieces of the shield broke off. They also add that, beneath the avcoat coating, there is an extremely strong composite structure, which is supported by a titanium framework. And it was with this safety margin in mind that they made one of the most controversial decisions in recent times, which could indeed put the lives of the astronauts at risk. In the laboratory, NASA was able to identify the permeability issues of the shield. However, replacing it will not be possible because it would be even more expensive and further delay the program. NASA's option is to make this change only on Artemis 3 and keep the same material for this mission. However, to avoid facing the same problems as Artemis 1, they changed the flight path to something more similar to the Apollo missions. The exposure will decrease from approximately 14 minutes to about 8. The goal is simple: to reduce the time the spacecraft spends in the most critical part so that gases do not accumulate and cracks do not form during re-entry. While the heat shield of Artemis 1 showed failures for not being permeable enough, the heat shield of Artemis 2 is even less so. According to Daniel Olivas, former NASA astronaut and member of the independent review team that produced the report, from which we just read some excerpts, about 6% of the Artemis 1 heat shield was made of permeable material, and these areas did not show cracks. According to the former astronaut, Artemis 2 does not have any permeable areas. This change was made even before the Artemis 1 flight, when it was not yet understood that permeability was essential for the correct functioning of the system. Well, besides the former astronaut, experts like Paul Hill have noted that there is very little actual flight data available to validate NASA's analysis. Charlie Camarda was even more critical, stating that the decision to rely on flight adjustments instead of design changes represents a reckless and unjustified gamble. Critics argue that if a private contractor had discovered such a flaw, NASA would require a complete new test before approving a manned mission. We can use the return of the Starliner from the International Space Station without astronauts in 2024 as an example. Critics also clarified that if the simulations and ground tests were sufficient, the fragmentation phenomenon of the Artemis 1 heat shield would not have emerged unexpectedly. The critics emphasized that this redundancy or thermal tolerance in the inner layers of the shield observed was not planned. It was luck. They draw parallels with the cases of the Challenger and Columbia Space Shuttle accidents. At the time, the technical risks were known, but they were managed through procedures instead of being corrected at the root of the problem. After nearly 20 years of development, the Orion has already consumed about $30 billion, adjusted for inflation. Discovering a weakness in such an important safety component after an investment of this size is seen as embarrassing even by industry veterans, and it is in scenarios like this that the comparison with SpaceX always comes up. That's because NASA and Elon Musk's companies are solving the same problems, but in different ways. Well, NASA's approach with Orion is based on prediction. The heat shield is evaluated mainly through computer models and ground tests. The actual flights only exist to confirm what the models already indicate. And this is not negligence, it is a consequence of costs. When each mission costs billions of dollars, flight testing becomes something to be avoided unless absolutely necessary. And even though they are spacecraft for different purposes, the Dragon, for example, is based on the opposite principle. But its true learning comes from real flights. The problems do not remain in debate for years and years. They are corrected, tested again in flight, and continuously adjusted. The difference lies in the speed of feedback. For NASA, computational models are the authority and flights validate. For SpaceX, flights are the authority and computational models provide support. Orion flies rarely because it needs to. Dragon flies frequently because it can.